So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. As Jenny said, quite an early session for some of you. But we are very pleased to be here. And we are going to talk about some sort of forecast for 2022, which I think is quite interesting given the situation. And I think that for us, it's quite an interesting exercise, again, because of the situation being very fluid. But before we go into the details, so I'm going to present myself and Jenny also. So my name is Mathieu Bidamant, and I'm working for American Express Meeting and Events, and I'm responsible for global sales and strategy. Jenny with me is going to introduce herself, but she came with me because she's responsible of existing clients, and I think she's the right person to confirm that what I'm going to say is reality from what we've seen so far.
Just keeping you honest.
Yeah,
Hello, everyone. I'm Crewe, and as Matthew said, I head up the global account group for American Express Meeting and Events. So I look after all of our global customers that have contracts with us for strategic meetings management. And the forecast is very interesting. Matthew will talk you through some of the metrics and how we do the forecast. But it's interesting because obviously it's such a fast-paced changing world at the moment that I hope that I can maybe add a bit of flavour of what's gone on even since the forecast. So I'll jump in, if we've got any further insights. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you. So this forecast, we are doing this forecast for the last 11 years. So the way and the methodology of this forecast is really data-driven. So I will go into the details a bit further down the line, but this is data that we get from surveys that are being asked to a lot of people from the industry. Part of that forecast, again, today is more to give you some sort of glimpse about it. You will be able to download. We will share with you the link, so you can download it if you have not done already, and you can look at it. It's quite a big paper with a lot of different sections, as you can see. So these are the high-level sections. So I'm not going to go through that, but it's just to give you an idea of, a lot of different data and a lot of different details that we are going to, that you can look for and that you can really search and find some good understanding. So what we want to give you today is more like very high level about some of the key trends. Obviously, as Jenny said, and as I said at the beginning, these trends are obviously interesting because the survey has been done during the summer. Survey has been sent to organizations, corporations, associations, suppliers, clients, and this is really based on what's feeling in the summer. Okay, but so far, from what we have seen, except over the last, I would say, week with Omicron, the trends that we have seen from those people that we have been gathering are already what has been happening in reality.
Yeah.
And again, Jenny will give a bit more details a bit later. But that's the idea. In terms of, it's to work. So in terms of, as I said, the methodology, so just to give you an idea of the methodology, it was sent to 500 people, more or less, over the summer, and you can see the regions. So you can see also that this is really very global. It does give you a global picture, right? Because this more than 500 people have been interviewed, and they're all based and located in different regions in 5 continents. And I think we had like around 32 countries that people were located off. So it does really give you a good understanding. And again, we will see some global trends, and then part of the different section, as I said before, you got some regional, and you even have some local trends. Actually, just to give you an idea, we are doing, on a regular basis, when we are doing those forecasts, we are doing some local events also in different countries. We were 2 weeks ago in London and also in Stockholm and Copenhagen, where we were trying to give that sort of, locally, that sort of sense about, what was the forecast, and also engage, with prospects or clients to really understand and have that sort of, feeling and conversation about the forecast and about where the industry is going. One thing that really gets out of this year is about being optimistic. So is it still the case today? We'll see, because we're going to ask you. I personally, and really personally, I'm still very optimistic. We know that there have been some evolution recently. We had a few weeks ago, so it doesn't matter. I think that everybody, and the fact that you are here, and the fact that IBTM is standing here, I think that everybody is really willing to make it happen, and everybody wants to be optimistic. So, talking about optimistic, I'm going to ask you a question. So this question actually was asked during the process of doing the forecast, and has been asked to the 500 people we are talking about. So before I share the results and the outcome, we are going to make it the old way. So raise your hand when you do expect the number of attendees at in-person meetings and events to return to pre-pandemic levels, so more or less to 2019. So 2019 is benchmark for everything. So within the next 1 to 2 years, please raise your hand. Thank you. Within 5 years? OK. Not expected to return to 2019 levels? Interesting. So if I've seen correctly, I feel that everybody said more within the 5 years. That's my feeling.
It's about 50-50, I think, between 1 and 2 and then 5 years.
Yeah, but I think it was a bit more 5 years, which is interesting because we did exactly the same as I said last week in London, Copenhagen, and Stockholm, and everybody said A. So this is interesting with what is happening currently. I think mix and make a bit of change because actually...
The challenge with forecasting in this environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you go to the results, we had over the summer, as you can see, it was to the 1 to 2 years. So again, seems like maybe because of the current situation that we have seen on the news for, again, it's a week. We are in that sort of bubble of uncertainty because nobody knows yet how it's going to evolve. So maybe it's a bit less optimistic. But from what we have seen since end of the summer,
End of the summer, there's real pent-up demand, especially with our healthcare customers, because they engage with healthcare professionals like doctors, and not being able to meet face-to-face, there's definitely a real pent-up demand from those types of customers to be able to get out there and see their customers again face-to-face. So I think for smaller meetings particularly, there was a really strong upturn. And then we were seeing an enormous amount of larger meetings for next year starting to be planned. But already in the last 48 hours, that is kind of starting to change again because people are nervous about whether or not they're going to be able to continue with those events next year. So some are just ringing to ask us about cancellation clauses or change clauses, and others are just holding off to see what happens. So it's such a fast-moving environment. But definitely we're seeing a strong demand from a lot of customer base for meetings to come back face-to-face and incorporating hybrid into most of the larger ones.
And we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So coming back to the forecast, thanks, Jenny. So part of those forecasts, we have seen 5 macro trends for 2022. So for now, we're going to cover the first 3 ones, and then we cover the last 2 ones. So the first 3 ones are actually, except this first one. This first one is like meeting needs to return. It's a must. So everybody wants to meet. So again, as Jenny said, and even us personally, I've done a meeting with my team as soon as we could. We can see a lot of clients that are really engaged and they wanted to do that. So really the big trend was to say, we need to come back. And again, this is the industry. We want to be able to return. That was the first big trend. The second one, which is, I think, very interesting, but it's not new, but it's becoming more and more important, is about meeting policy. So I must say that the meeting policy became more and more critical and people want to be more strategic since, unfortunately, the terrorist issues and challenges and attack we had a few years back where people needed to understand, okay, we need the meeting policies because there is a duty of care. Everything is linked, right? So obviously, with what happened in 2020, meeting policies are becoming critical, okay? And to be honest, in 2020, I'm leading a global sales team. We never had so many corporations coming to us asking for support, making sure to understand, okay, how can I have a proper program? How can I really be able to manage everything? We can't have no program anymore in place. We need to understand what is happening. We need to have a backup plan. We need to have policies. We need to know where are our people. It's duty of care, right? So that's the second trend. And again, we go into more details. The third trend is actually also very interesting. And this is something that started a few years ago, but become even more critical last year, is the role of the meeting planners. So today, when you're doing a meeting and you want to make sure that everything is being taken care of, and the meeting planners are not anymore the people that will be on site, they will be the people being on site, but also because we can see that there are more and more, and this is what we're going to cover, there will be more and more virtual elements to your meetings. So these meeting planners should be able to do some on-site planning, but also making sure that whatever you have as a backup, which can be virtual, is happening also. So there is that sort of scope of responsibilities that has been enhanced. And there is also, as I said, duty of care. What is the backup plan? If there is, I don't know, whatever natural catastrophe, what is the backup plan? What is happening? So this is what we are seeing. The last two trends are really the one that really emerged for 2022 because of, I would say, 2020 and 2021, is virtual and hybrid formats. So we are going to talk about this more, but obviously, because of what happened in 2020 and even 2021 still, there has been a switch, right? So people couldn't be able to meet anymore in person. So there has been that element of 100% virtual with all the lockdown, and then what we call the hybrid, which is more or less, if a good example for an hybrid would be like, we are meeting together, we are face-to-face, and then we'll be connected to, I don't know, somewhere else in Hong Kong. That would be the hybrid definition for us, very simple. So obviously, and we are going again to talk about more, but that's one of the key trends for 2022 is the virtual and hybrid. And again, because we know that this format is a great enabler, and we need it because, again, it could be, and I think you don't have a choice anymore, is that even if you want to do a face-to-face meeting, there is some sort of need that you need to offer a virtual alternative also. Because you may see that a lot of people may not feel comfortable anymore to attend a face-to-face meeting, and you need to leave them the choice.
And you also need to be able to pivot, don't you, that if it can't go ahead for whatever reason, that you need to have an alternative.
Exactly, and that's the backup. So that's the contingency plan that you need to have. And then the last point, and you could say that, and because we've seen that all over, it's about wellness, sustainability, and diversity. And what we do believe is not buzzwords. Obviously, everybody's talking about this, but I think it has really enhanced over the last 2 years. But it's really something that we see that is reality. So there's a lot of focus, and I think that, Jenny, you will have some example on, the clients who really wants to have that sort of, sustainability focus. The wellness, I think, was already in the air for quite some years, where people wanted to make sure when you are meeting, there is some sort of making sure that everybody feels right. But then there is also the word diversity, which is and inclusion, which is very important also. So that's the trends for next year. Linked to this, we have the safety and the flexibility. Again, really completely linked to what I've just said, is making sure that duty of care is part of your program. Making sure that everybody feels comfortable and that, everything is taken care of.
I mean, it's really critical as well, of course. We've seen with IBTM that at the last minute they've had to make changes to ask for a COVID vaccination pass to come into the event. And again, it's pivoting and being able to deal with these changes and accept that things will happen as you're going through the course of planning your event. So it's absolutely critical to have that sort of flexibility, but always have that eye on what's happening and go with it.
Absolutely. If we're moving on, the budget, sorry. One last point we want to discuss before we go to another poll is about the budget, and it's linked certainly at some point of safety and security and also duty of care, but more on what I was talking about, the hybrid and virtual elements. So a lot of our clients or even prospects came to us in the past and said, oh, you know what, we are going to switch now all our face-to-face meeting to hybrid, as I just said, because it's good, because it does give options, which is good, but there is some sort of assumption of a lot of people that think that actually it will be cheaper. No, it can't be cheaper. It's actually more expensive because you have to take care of your normal meeting face-to-face, but then you are adding some sort of virtual element, so you are adding some cost. So that's also actually some sort of education that we try to say to our clients, but also that some organization does recognize, because they do say that actually the budget are going to be increased because they need to take care of that elements within their budget because there would be more cost, actually.
Yeah, and we had a session yesterday on hybrid events specifically, and one of the things we were talking about was, to really put on a professional hybrid event with good production and making sure that you've got the right technology to sort of meet your objectives. It all costs quite a lot, and it's like managing more than one event. So if you've got 2 hybrid locations plus a virtual element, you're managing multiple events. You've got to manage the delegate experience for all 3 different parts, and it can become very costly. So I think this may be why our poll, did deliver that everyone is expecting the cost to increase in the future because of these elements that are being built in. Not necessarily because the cost of a hotel or an airfare is going up. I think it's more to do with these ancillary things. Plus the fact there's costs as well for all the testing that's required, and all of those elements as well for attending, for travelling, etc.
Thanks, Jenny. So moving on to the next one, which is a poll and is linked to everything we just said. Meeting must happen. Really that desire to make it happen. So what sort of meeting type, and again, I will give you the answer from the forecast just after, but I will ask you to raise your hand on what sort of meeting type you will increase most next year. So what you think may be the most of the meetings next year. So if we start with A, small and simple meetings, raise your hand, please.
Who thinks that they will be
small and simple meetings? Internal meetings, trainings? Okay, more people. Incentive. Okay. Trade show, conferences. Okay. Senior leadership. Interesting. And client advisory board. Okay.
It's a real mix, actually.
Yeah, but yeah, there was
apart from the last couple.
Yeah, B. I think B was clearly the one which is still what we've seen since the summer, and what actually we are seeing since the summer in reality. Internal team meetings is really, and I would say not really trainings, but more internal trainings, meaning that you all know, and maybe you've been part of that, for the last 22 months, people have been working from home. They have not really meet with each other. Some people have been on furlough. So there is really that desire from corporation, making sure that, okay, let's get together, try to see each other. We've been seeing each other for 22 months on Teams, on Zoom. So it's great, everything about the life of your people, but it's good also to be together, right? So that's really the trend we've seen about internal meetings, trying to make sure that, there is that sort of feeling back to the wellness, also making sure that employees feel great again, being part of corporations, to have that sort of, bound to come back. So that's really the majority and the focus. Second one is the small, simple meetings. Actually, I was surprised that there was not that many hands raising about this one, which is interesting. And then the last one, same thing, very few people, about client customer advisory board. Again, and this is linked from what we've seen about the fact that corporations want to make sure that they are reconnected with their clients. And that's certainly one of the drivers of the growth. So if we move on, and that will be a transition to you, Jenny, about, again, the virtual and the hybrid format that, as I just said, over the 22 months, everybody has been using Zoom, Teams, whatever technology you have. So, but also meeting planners. So, for example, at MXMNE, our meeting planners, big majority already knew on how to do hybrid or virtual events, because we are doing this for some of our clients, but obviously there has been an enhanced in terms of training of our teams. So it does mean that the industry, but also I would say the location, like the hotels, have also raised their skills in terms of being able to manage hybrid and virtual events. So there is a big more comfort in terms of using that technology, and this is something that will stay. But again, I do see that as an enabler, and that will help moving forward, making sure that you can engage with your audience, and again, taking into account duty of care, as I just said.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matthew. So let's have a look at some of the other key trends. So one of the things that is challenging is finding enough space, because obviously, with social distancing, you need larger spaces, and there's less opportunities for, larger rooms, etc. And then also, we're looking for different things. So we need locations to be able to host hybrid events and maybe have technology capabilities like, bandwidth for the internet, etc., to be able to incorporate those elements into a meeting. So definitely in the survey, obviously, you can see the percentages here of what is needed now in terms of space, and also obviously understanding safety protocols within a space as well. Some are better than others. But I would also add that even since the survey, one of the things that's come up more recently with the whole Omicron disaster is that we're now actually seeing customers looking at what the cancellation terms are and the flexibility within the contract for space. So they're looking to work with suppliers that maybe give them a bit more flexibility on their terms and conditions as well. So there's even another element to this. And it's just, it is becoming quite challenging to get enough space that has all those elements that you need. So then we'll look at, Matthew touched on policy and policies becoming more critical. And I think that this is, really due to a number of reasons. Obviously, primarily from the duty of care perspective. So customers in the past perhaps weren't so bothered about looking at where the smaller meetings were, or monitoring those, and perhaps only doing data on the larger meetings. But of course, with this duty of care piece, it's so important that we're all able to take care of employees and meeting attendees, and to be able to give them the same level of support, whether they're going to a meeting with 3 people or 300. So you can see that obviously our survey respondents said that these are the elements which they needed to build into their policies. And of course, there's a need to build in cancellation clauses into policies, also around the virtual and hybrid and how to operate the virtual and hybrid. And in fact, we are seeing a lot of customers introducing even like a decision tree. So they go through a decision tree first of all to say, oh, well, actually, does this meeting need to take place? Could it be virtual? No. Then, okay, does it need to be hybrid? And so really going into that level of detail in amending their policies. And we're very active in supporting customers to do that. And then the other thing as well is looking at return on investment, but I'll cover that again in a bit more detail. So as we mentioned earlier, some of these key trends in what is being incorporated into the meetings that Matthew touched on earlier. But attendee wellness now is so critical for every meeting attendee, because we've got this heightened level of anxiety if you're going in person, and there's a need to really over-communicate in terms of making sure that on-site delegates know what's going to happen, and also what level of support is there, what happens if something does happen, what will they do, and how will they be supported. But also there's a real focus on attendee wellness for virtual attendees as well, because I'm sure that everybody in this room can resonate with the fact that, when you're sat on a chair in front of a screen, it's really tiring and it's hard to concentrate, especially if you're on camera for long periods of time. So there's a real focus around looking at how those attendees as well have their needs met, and making sure that they have enough break time, they have enough sessions as well in their meeting agenda to be able to get up and stretch, food breaks, etc. And everybody's conscious, I think, much more of like making sure that delegates are looked after both virtually and in person. And then we've also talked about sustainability. Now, sustainability is nothing new, but I think we all saw like this huge sort of focus on it within the lockdowns and the changes that we saw. And I think about 83% of our customers that responded to this poll said that sustainability goals were part of their meeting policies. And one of the challenges that we're seeing customers face at the moment is finding out what their baseline is. So how do you establish what your baseline is? So if you're trying to measure sustainability goals for a meeting, where are you starting from? So again, we've got some tips in the wider, survey that we'll give you access to. But I think that, it's not just looking at while you're on site at the meeting with single-use plastic, food waste and all that, but it's also, the carbon footprint. And this is something that has actually been really useful with the introduction of more hybrid and the options to go virtually, because that can then really help with the sustainability goal of reducing a carbon footprint. So definitely think that these types of hybrid events and virtual options are here to stay, because they do dovetail in nicely to sustainability policies as well. And then diversity, equity and inclusion. You know, this is something that in North America, for example, diversity suppliers are a big thing over there, and often customers are targeted, you know, to use a certain percentage of diverse suppliers. And this is something that a lot of our global customers that I work with are trying to make more of a global initiative. And it can be something as simple as, you know, looking at who your speakers are and trying to choose diverse suppliers. I joked yesterday with a group that I was talking to about the fact that, you know, one of the minority groups is women, apparently, and I said we're 50% of the population, so how can we be a minority? But I think the point is that everybody, you know, should be treated equally, and diversity, equity and inclusion is definitely paramount in all of my customers' policies, and, you know, there are ways to incorporate that. But again, it's also establishing a baseline of where you are today so that you can measure it. There's no point in talking about these things if you can't show progress. So in terms of the meeting planners, again, Matthew touched on the fact that, you know, it's very more complex now. And let's just think about that, because we had one of my team, a couple of my team came in and did a debrief with us after an event that we did in the summer. And I was just like so humbled at their expertise and the things that they'd had to put up with, because we had an event where obviously the attendees were from multiple countries, so their rules in their countries kept changing around what they needed in terms of testing and travelling and what they could do. And then they also needed different visas because they were different nationalities going to the event, and some of those things kept changing. And then the conditions on the ground in the country changed as well, like they introduced a curfew in the evenings in the country where the event was going to happen. And then at the event, you know, you want technology, so then you've got virtual and hybrid technology, and you've got online delegate registration, you've maybe got a mobile app. The meeting planners now need to be these amazing gurus on absolutely everything, and they need to have expertise on the technology products as well as, you know, being able to advise on all of the restrictions, etc. So we're asking a lot of meeting planners, and certainly in, you know, my world, we've tried to help by giving them training on some of the most commonly used technologies, and we also have, you know, created sort of super users, experts, etc., because we're being asked to do so much more, and I'm sure that this is a challenge for all of you guys as well. So and there are so many technology entrants, aren't there, as well, and you have to be an expert in all of those. So I think this is again dovetailing into the fact that costs may be increasing because you need more people on site to be able to help you manage these complexities. So our dear meeting planners, we need them more and more. So I'm just going to grab my notes for this part because it's a very busy slide and there's lots of information to impart to you. So we've done a deep dive in the survey into each region. And so when you download it, you'll be able to see the complexity of each region. But I'm just going to focus on Europe today because obviously we're in a European conference. So these are some of the highlights of the European section. So it's actually showed a slightly less optimistic view from our European survey respondents in terms of, you know, coming back to meeting in person, etc. You know, compared to some of the other areas of the world, it was perhaps slightly less optimistic. But even so, it was expected that, you know, there would be a really high level of returning to in-person meetings. And there was a general feeling that the meeting and, you know, meeting space was going to expand in the next year, and there was going to be more availability. And actually, I would say I would add a word of caution to that now, because what we have seen with our customers that I'm working with is actually a slightly different story emerging, in that because there is less space to accommodate social distancing and all of the things that we talked about, what we're finding is actually we are often competing for the same space, the same block, you know, of dates, and actually the hotel may have like 3 or 4 other customers waiting for options on that same space, and in fact they are sometimes choosing to go with someone who maybe has better payment terms or is, has a preferred supplier agreement with them, and they know that they're going to continue to work with them and get more business in the future. So I think this is starting to change a little since the survey. So it's quite interesting that I think the smaller spaces are fine. For us, we're finding difficulty with the larger spaces because, you need to have an even larger space for the larger group, and therefore it narrows down the options. So my advice would be to all of us in this room is to, if at all possible, for meeting owners, for them not to narrow down the exact dates and the exact destination before they come to you, because you need to be a bit more flexible if you can in saying, let's do it within these 2 weeks and you tell me where's the best place to go. And that would also help fit better into sustainability goals and finding the right location. So again, in Europe, 64% saw that budgets would increase. So I think that this is consistent with what we're seeing globally. And we talked about that earlier in terms of, hybrid technologies and things changing. We're also seeing that there are more attendees to each type of meeting. So I think that what we're seeing is that customers are looking at, okay, if we're going to do this event, let's make it really matter, and let's make sure that we, make the most of it. And can we get a few more people to attend to make it really worthwhile? There may also be an element of, okay, let's invite a few more because maybe more will pull out. But actually, it's what we're seeing, in fact, is if people commit to actually attending in person, they tend to turn up at the moment, because I think it takes so much for us to work through all of the things that we need to do to actually attend and go to somewhere in person, that once you've decided you're going, you tend to commit to it, and we're having less cancellations. Now, interestingly, the top meeting destinations, this is pulled from October last year to September this year. These were our customer, for our global customers in Europe, their top meeting destinations. And I think it's quite interesting because we always used to see in the past, London, Madrid, Paris, and now we've got Athens has crept into the forefront there. And I think that may be because their borders were more flexible throughout the COVID period, and actually they're a lot more cost effective.
Yeah, more cheaper.
Yeah, so I think that might be why, but it's just an interesting piece of information. So I know there's a lot of other statistics in there, but I don't want to go into too much detail. So what we'll do is, obviously, as I said, have access to that so that you can read the notes. So the other piece that's really resonating with everybody and is coming out of the survey is the need to be flexible. So I mentioned that example of, if you're talking to your meeting planners and, your meeting organisers and meeting owners, try to be flexible. Our planners all have to be so flexible at the moment in trying to look at pivoting to different options and working with the way that the environment is changing. And so it's really important for us to all be flexible, for suppliers to try and work closely with customers to be flexible where possible on cancellation and attrition terms, for meeting planners to be flexible in changing options, and for meeting, owners to try and be a bit more flexible in what offerings they're giving to their delegates. You can attend virtually or you can attend in person. And I think that's really a key theme that's come out of this as well, is the need for this flexibility. So just the other piece that I want to talk about as well is how do we measure return on investment? Because one of the challenges that a lot of my customers have been talking to me about is, if we're thinking of going back to an in-person event and we had it virtually over the pandemic, how do I show that there's a better return on investment from actually meeting in person? I mean, the relationships that you can build over the coffee breaks, over the dinners, it's hard to actually pinpoint the benefit of that, but definitely we know that there is one. So we have got some more content in the document as well, with my team and our account managers giving their tips on how to kind of maybe measure what the return on investment would be for these different types of meetings to help establish that, because I think, there needs to be justifications as well for corporations to be able to say, actually, we do need to meet in person, and even though it's complex, there is so much more value to it. And so we can help you with that in the study as well. So we've kind of run through our high level of it, and hopefully that's been of help to you, and we've allowed enough minutes for perhaps some questions or some discussion. So obviously you see the link here, but I think IBTM are going to be posting that as well on the app, etc., so that you can download. And please, of course, reach out to Matthew or myself, and you can come up and grab a card or talk to us afterwards. But let me pause for a minute and see, has anybody got any questions or any comments they'd like to make about the content today? Come on, don't be shy. I hope it was of use to you all. No one? Okay, well then maybe you have 10 minutes for a coffee. But thank you very much for attending.